3 million Americans will be kicked off of food stamps. 3 million Americans.
I want to talk about the larger issue, which is universal health care. Because if you actually cared about people, if you really were concerned about paying down the debt and how much this costs, like you said, if you want people to be able to work like you claimed, which by the way, completely leaves out disabled folks and conversations around that, but that's a conversation for another video, you would be advocating for universal health care. Because you would not be getting off into the weeds, discussing the details, trying to justify these Medicaid cuts if you actually cared about the things that you claim you care about in that video. You would not only be saying that these cuts are detrimental, but the current system isn't working. What we need is universal health care. The United States is the only industrialized country without universal health care. And we actually spend more per person on our health care than the other countries that have universal health care do. You would be advocating for universal health care. I genuinely cannot keep doing this with y'all. I am so sick and tired of having these arguments, these conversations and discussions be around stupid little things like whether or not we should have work requirements and whether or not they work. They don't, by the way. The conversation is universal health care.
I'm an American. I pay $1,600 for a flat that has no bedroom. That's 2/3 of my income. I'm an American. I work 50 hours a week. I don't have health insurance. I'm an American. I couldn't afford to have a child even if I wanted to. I am $7,000 in debt. I'm an American. My health is declining because I can't afford Whole Foods because that's too expensive for my life. I am very overqualified for my job, but no one else is hiring. I'm an American. I make my boss hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, while I can barely keep myself alive. I'm an American. I have never been out of the States. I have never been on a vacation. I'm an American. I make $20-some an hour. A livable wage here is like 30-some. Yet I don't qualify for government assistance whatsoever. On the days I don't work, I'm so tired I just sleep all day. I'm an American. My electric bill is so expensive I sit outside in the heat because I can't afford to turn the AC on in the damn house. I'm an American, and I fear I'm just an average American. I'm living the American dream.
Family, many white people are crying right now, or rather complaining because of the high cost of living, thanks to the big beautiful bill and the cuts it has introduced. This is also thanks to them voting for Donald J. Trump. Family, most white people in America voted for Donald Trump because of his racist ideologies. They thought that white interests would be met under his leadership as the president of the United States of America. Right now, white Americans are complaining a lot. The cost of living is skyrocketing each and every day. They thought that any policy that was to be made rather by the President Trump would be affecting black and brown people. But family, right now it's affecting everyone. We are now seeing cuts under the big beautiful bill. We're seeing cuts in Medicare, Medicaid, and many huge sectors like FEMA, and now white Americans are regretting voting for Trump, and right now it's becoming crazier as days goes by. So family, I want you to watch this video as white Americans complain about the cost of living and the cuts under the big beautiful bill. Once the video is done, we will get back and do a critical analysis about the same. Let's watch this video together, family.
When what's really happening here is Trump introduced a work requirement saying that before you can receive health coverage free of charge from the government, you have to work at least 80 hours per month.
Well, I could sit here and explain to you that there are states that already have work requirements. There are some states that had work requirements and got rid of them because it was actually more expensive to have those requirements than if they had just paid the Medicaid outright. How people with disabilities will be disproportionately affected by this bill because they rely so heavily on Medicaid to cover the costs of their care, of their disabilities. How disabled people are allowed to be paid what's known as a sub-minimum wage, which means they legally can be paid below the minimum wage. I think it's as little as like 50 cents an hour, or how that conversation ties into the larger conversation of raising the minimum wage. Because people with disabilities rely so heavily on assistance, things like Medicaid, if they make too much money, they get kicked off of it and literally die. I actually don't want to talk about any of that because I want to talk about the larger issue, which is universal health care. Because if you actually cared about people, if you really were concerned about paying down the debt and how much this costs, like you said, if you want people to be able to work like you claimed, which by the way, completely completely lives out disabled folks and conversations around that, but that's a conversation for another video. You would be advocating for universal health care because you would not be getting off into the weeds, discussing the details, trying to justify these Medicaid cuts if you actually cared about the things that you claim you care about in that video. You would not only be saying that these cuts are detrimental, but the current system isn't working. What we need is universal health care. The United States is the only industrialized country without universal health care, and we actually spend more per person on our health care than the other countries that have universal health care do. You would be advocating for universal health care. Like, I genuinely cannot keep doing this with y'all. Like, I am so sick and tired of having these arguments, these conversations and discussions be around stupid little things like whether or not we should have work requirements and whether or not they work. They don't, by the way. The conversation is universal health care. If you actually cared, it would be universal health care. That's what you would be advocating for. That's what you'd be pushing for. That's what you would be talking about. Oh my God. It drives me absolutely insane. Do you know how many billions of dollars the United States would save every year if we had universal health care? Do you know how many tens of thousands of lives we would save every year? You know, I see in one of your other videos, you were like, you guys just hate capitalists. You just hate billionaires. Do you know that the billionaire Koch brothers who own the multi-billion-dollar Koch industries did their own study on universal health care and found that it would also save billions of dollars every year? Like, oh my God, I am so sick of this. Just the bullshit. It's such bullshit, man. You have 200 and some odd thousand followers and you're just grifting off of things that will literally cost people their lives. Trying to pretend like you actually give a shit, and you don't. You so fucking don't. If you did, you would be like, this current system isn't working. This is going to make it 10 times worse. We need universal health care. Like, y'all, we deserve to have health care. I don't care who you are. I don't care how much money you make. You should be able to have and access health care. We live in the richest country on the fucking planet. And you're seriously going to sit here and tell me we somehow cannot afford it? We cannot somehow afford to make sure that, like, people have the medications that they need, the health care that they need, access to, like, resources and things that it's fucking laughable. It's literally, oh my God. I'll be honest with y'all, this is the easy part. The stuff I talked about in this video, advocating for universal health care, that's the easy part. If we really wanted to get into why it is we don't have universal health care, we'd have to talk about white supremacy. Uh-oh, now we're getting into it. Now we're making folks uncomfortable. Like, we'd also have to talk about just because we would have universal health care doesn't mean that medical racism goes anywhere. Yikes! Like, now we're really having the conversation, really getting to the root of the problem here. Like, this is the easy stuff. I'm so tired of begging y'all to see the humanity in your fellow Americans and your fellow human beings. I am so tired of it. If you actually gave a shit at all, you would be advocating for universal health care.
I'm really disappointed in the vote on this new budget bill that's going to surely cut Medicaid. My sister has a disability. She has Down syndrome, and she has a ton of health issues. She also has 3 insurances, but that isn't going to stop her from being harmed, along with a bunch of other people. That my sister is eligible for Social Security disability insurance. Medicare covers only 80% of charges. If my sister goes to the doctor, then her secondary insurance has to kick in. Her secondary insurance is through the Department of Defense, and it's called TRICARE. TRICARE doesn't cover a lot of what Medicare doesn't cover, and that's when Medicaid kicks in. So for the sheer number of doctor appointments and medications that my sister has, if she didn't have Medicaid to pick up where TRICARE doesn't pay, then we would be fucked because her medicines cost a ton of money. She has Medicare Part D, which covers her medications. The key here is Medicaid. Medicaid pays for her eyeglass exams. It pays for her glasses. It pays for her specialty dental care. She goes to a clinic for people with disabilities at the University of Washington. It pays for her to have access to an adult day center. It pays for her to have a caregiver, and that's me. and it pays for her to have community access outside of the day centers, and she can do things to be out and about in the community. And this is what's called quality of life, and is in need of certain supplies. So Medicaid pays for those supplies. I just send an email to her case manager and I say, hey, Rebecca's out of X supplies. Can you send some? And it's really important for people to know this, because without Medicaid, a lot of people are going to suffer. And when I say a lot of people, I mean anybody who has a disability who has Medicaid. So it's really, really important for you to understand how important Medicaid is. It isn't just for medical care, it's for so many other things. And I urge you, please, like, even if you're in a Democratic district and has pledged to save Medicaid, continue calling, sending postcards, do like a work party, do something, because it's really important. Pressure and keep pressure on these people. The thing is that not everybody with a disability can advocate for themselves, and they need the rest of us to do that for them. Please don't forget people with disabilities. And also, don't forget this, that no matter your income, no matter your background, no matter your gender, no matter what, disability is the only identity that anybody can have at any time in their lives. And what that means is that you can become disabled at any time. But I'm here, I'm witness to it every single day.
So there's nothing I hate more in the world than a crying white woman video, but I'm so angry and I can't even hold it inside. I got to read Governor Walz's proposed budget this morning, and there are proposed caps on waiver increases for inflation for people with disabilities. So the CADI waiver, the DD waiver, the BI waiver. And those caps will put such a strain on the already under-resourced disability community in this state. You have to hire staff out of that budget. So many parents of children with disabilities use it to pay themselves to care for their kids because there are no daycares for kids with disabilities, so they have to drop out of the workforce. And it pays for medical care and therapies that insurance won't cover. It helps people pay for housing and food and just basic things, services. And then the strip described the state of that policy in Minnesota as generous, and said that it's so much that the state pays $50,000 a disabled person for that program, but it costs that much for people with disabilities to live. So now they're saying that we need to come up with that, and we can't. People are going to lose their homes. People are going to die. Parents that have pulled themselves out of the workforce are going to be unable to pay bills. There's nowhere to put kids. And adults that have been using their waiver funds to stay out of group homes are going to be forced back into it. We're going to see such an increase in institutionalization after decades and decades of working to get people back into community and to make this a world where they could live in dignity. And before people say, why don't people with disabilities work? And a lot of them can have jobs in the market, especially even with higher salaries. But the rules around these programs mean that they can't work, especially Medicaid. So people would lose their waivers and they would lose their Medicaid, and private insurance just doesn't pay for things like modifying a van so your wheelchair can go in and out of it, or so you can drive it. There are people who are fully disabled from the waist down, or even in other ways, that are able to get modifications so they can drive and be independent, or need lifts so that they can get in and out of bed without injuring their family members or caretakers. Things that insurance just won't cover. And because of that, you can't work, because if you make too much money, you have to pay such high premiums for that program that it's not doable. And we've been fighting to get rid of that, the premium for the Medicaid for a while now, and clearly that's not going to happen because they don't even want us to get waivers. And don't let them say that they're not cutting waivers or taking waivers away from people, because capping the inflation rate at 2% means that you won't be able to have the buying power to both hire staff and pay for medical care. We all know that that is rising more than 2% a year. And I didn't even get into special education busing. They are cutting funding for that by 50% and saying that the cross subsidy will pay for it for 50%, but the cross subsidy is so big that school districts are cutting huge amounts out of their budget. We're closing a school in Bloomington. Minneapolis is faced with unimaginable cuts. Even Edina is cutting their school budgets, and we're putting more on the schools for disabled children, which is breaking a promise that the state and federal government made to keep people in community and to treat people with respect and dignity. This is the maddest I've been in a long time, and I hope that the legislature pushes back on this, but I'm not optimistic, and I feel like I'm gonna spend every waking minute that I'm not doing my stupid day job at the Capitol begging. So it's a really rough day for people with disabilities and their families. Yeah, it's gonna be such a hard and long session. I was dreading it before, but I didn't expect it.
So Friday night at midnight, the federal government canceled $400 million in grant funding towards AmeriCorps. Why is no one talking about this? These grants, primarily state grants in the state and national program, literally displaced over 30,000 individuals. These individuals who were secure in their contracts, so they thought, and who were literally serving their communities. For those of you who don't know, AmeriCorps is a civil service program, literally providing all of these services to communities. Many of these services are going towards low-income and marginalized communities. These programs are providing education and assistance in finding healthcare and food assistance, programs that our country really needs. And this doesn't even account for the services that AmeriCorps members receive as part of the program, like healthcare, food assistance if need be, a modest living stipend, which is being canceled.
The USDA just canceled over $1 billion in funding for schools and food banks to buy from local farms. Here's what that means. 2 major programs just got shut down. One helped schools and child care centers buy fresh local food. The other funded food banks and community feeding programs. Both were meant to make food supply chains stronger and get nutritious meals out to people who need them. Now, no new funding is coming. States can use what's left in their current agreements, but once that's gone, that's it. No more. School nutrition officials are worried because schools depend on this to provide healthier meals. Food banks are losing a key funding source, and small farmers who supplied these programs just lost a major buyer. Even governors are pushing back. Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey called the cuts devastating for families and farmers. At a time when food prices are high and food insecurity is rising, this decision matters. Schools, food banks, and local farmers are all affected. So what happens next? That's the question. What do you think? Let me know in the comments.
Donald Trump's reckless action cut off funding to law enforcement, farmers, schools, child care, veterans, and health care. While he was out golfing, he threw the country into crisis. This is not bold. It's not leadership. It's stupid, buffoonish, childish of exactly what they did. Child care providers across the state, law enforcement, our prisons, things that we count on. Individuals on Medicare, things that we know matter to people's lives. This is not Trump's stakes. This is the state of Minnesota and its people's lives. These are children in there expecting to come here, parents expecting to put them there, and now to be put at risk over this just reckless proposal or whatever this is. It was not even well thought out. But again, the folks behind it, they know what they're doing. So my words on this are going to be simple to the Trump administration. We'll see you in court.
The Trump administration literally just announced that they will be withholding federal funds for natural disaster preparedness to states and cities that boycott Israeli companies. Now, I'm not an American, but if I was an American, I would be really pissed if my government was willing to put the lives of American citizens at risk because my state or city boycotted companies from a foreign nation. Your government is literally willing to let you and your entire family be more likely to pass away in a natural disaster for the benefit of Israel.
3 million Americans will be kicked off of food stamps. 3 million Americans.
There's a lot of things I could and want to say, but as someone who's been on food stamps multiple times in my life, I know that shit's rough. I don't know how else to put it besides that. And now things are only gonna get rougher. And with food banks being stretched thin as it is, I don't know, man. I'm just mad. Fucking bullshit. I don't know what else to do besides try and help. So I'm gonna donate $500 to my local food bank. And if you're someone fortunate enough like myself, they could really use it. And my heart truly goes out to anyone affected by this.
Family, the complaints you're seeing in this video are thanks to fascism and racism. They thought that black people would be the ones who would be getting the heat alone. But right now, every other American is facing the heat. Rich billionaires are continuing to being richer. You know, they are not being taxed. There are tax cuts, you know, for the billionaires, while the local people, the ordinary citizen, is going deep and deep in his pockets to pay even for healthcare services. We're seeing cuts in the Medicare and Medicaid. That would also mean that each and every citizen would go deeper into their pockets to pay for their bills in the hospital. Think of the nursing homes, what is happening right now. Medicaid won't be able to cover nursing homes in full. And right now, many nursing homes are shying away from this cover. They want their patients to pay for these services fully. Imagine having to nurse your old grandma at home and you do not have the skills to do so. The cost of living is so high, you do not have the time for nursing your grandparent. You're working 50 hours, you know, it's crazy for you. You're working so hard, but now what you're getting cannot be able even to pay for your rent. We've seen a lady in this video complaining, saying she pays $1,600 for a room, even without a bedroom. Just imagine how crazy America is becoming. These all thanks to people voting for Donald Trump, thinking that a section of people would be actually affected. The fascism we've seen in America is still continuing under the leadership of Donald J. Trump. Family, the foundations of America have always been those of slavery, blood, and cries of black people. Family, some of these leaders and the goal of American system has always been to ensure that black folks, you know, remain in the bottom. And in the process, right now, you're seeing white people cry because of the very same ideologies by the American systems, the white supremacist ideologies that want to shun black people from getting certain things. How do you explain to somebody today that America does not have the universal health care? The whole idea was to deny black people from getting access, you know, to these privileges. And in the process, white people are now also complaining that they are lacking something they feel is basic for the richest country in the world. Family, this is again thanks to racism. You know, it's becoming more and more expensive each and every day. And that's why you're seeing people complain in this video. We're seeing women cry, talking about how it will take them to pay a lot of money to ensure that their kid with a disability gets care in the hospital, because they are cutting monies from very important sectors. You know, look at the sector which handles calamities like floods, you know, hurricanes. They are cutting funds from that sector. They are pushing all that money, you know, to ICE detention centers. They've taken over $100 million to that sector. You know, you just ask yourself, what are the priorities of the American systems, of the American government? You know, their goal is to ensure that the marginalized, you know, the immigrants, black and brown people continue to suffer. But in the process, even white people are now suffering. And fam, I went further to do my research, and here is some of the pointers that I noticed that most white Americans are crying about. The universal healthcare. US is the only industrialized nation without universal healthcare coverage. The richest country in the world doesn't have resources, to cover healthcare. We are now seeing Medicare and Medicaid cuts. We know the intensity of having these cuts in the American system. We know, with the cost of living, having to get the extra money to pay in hospitals that you'd rather use to buy the very expensive groceries right now. This is making some Americans to sleep hungry because of a system that was made to try and make black and brown people suffer. But right now, it doesn't matter the color of your skin. It doesn't matter the country you originated from. It doesn't matter your ideologies. We are all trapped in a system that is against, black and brown people. Family seeing white folks cry out just shows you how much expensive racism is, how expensive nationalism is, how expensive fascism actually is. Family, the second point that I have noticed from my research is the USDA cuts, $1 billion cut in food funding. Family, this is affecting schools and food banks. The programs of ensuring that in communities people get food won't be there anymore. Imagine the very basic need for a human being is food. Imagine if schools cannot get food. Imagine the local communities with people who are struggling cannot access food thanks to the very same cuts, the USDA cuts. This funding usually helps schools access fresh food and community feeding programs. Imagine the communities right now do not have the very same feeding programs. No new funding is coming, and these will relatively affect masses. Farmers who supply this program have lost a major buyer. Imagine the farmers too will be losing a market. They have no one to supply to, because now the USDA cuts will be affecting, the food program in America. And family, this once again is not only affecting black people, it's affecting all Americans. This is the hard reality. That's why we are seeing right now more and more white people come out and say enough is enough. We are tired with this system. We just want the system to be equal. We want the system flat. Doesn't matter which state, doesn't matter the color of the people who want to be subjected to these very problems. Farmers who supply this program have lost a major buyer. Food prices are high and food insecurity is rising. Imagine the food prices are very, very high. The prices of food, groceries, very, very high. And at the same time, you want to cut food programs that serve schools, and community feeding programs. That just shows you the intentions of the government of the day. Family, more and more tough days are coming. It will be even tougher, in the coming months. Housing is very, very expensive. We had the lady say she pays $1,600 for a house without a bedroom. Just imagine. Imagine how expensive life can be. Family, this to me feels so unfair. But some people voted for these. They wanted their interest to be put in place. But whatever has happened is the opposite of what they actually intended. People are working 50 hours a week. People are working multiple jobs to ensure that they put food in the table, but the prices are too high. The electricity bill, very, very expensive. We also have the lady saying she does not put on the AC to ensure that now she's able to pay for her electricity. Family, imagine how unfair life can be. Imagine how expensive life can be. This is all thanks to voting the wrong leaders, to always supporting racism and fascism in America, to always be discriminative. You know, these are the fruits of that. And family, these are also some of the signs of punishment from God over what has been done to black communities in America for centuries. Family, let me know in the comment section down below what you think about this video. Kindly like the video so that it can be recommended to other YouTube users. I'd also request in a special way that you all do consider subscribing to the channel. We are currently on the road to 50,000 subscribers, and guys, I'd really appreciate if you'd be one of the people amongst my 50k subs, which we should be hitting soon, man. Kindly support me, like my content, share my content, and I'd really appreciate. The goal of the channel has always been to talk about black stories, black history, and ensure that we tell black stories the black way. Thank you guys, and see you all in our next episode. Goodbye for now.